Daber el kol hadas b'nei Yisrael v'omarta aleihem Kedoshim tiyu. There's something unique going on in Parshas Kedoshim, which I want to have a look at a bit more closely. And this is already touched upon by the Sforno in the beginning of the Parsha, who says that this Parsha is dealing not only with a list of mitzvahs, which is what it looks like at first sight, but actually Kadoshim Tiyu is describing the ultimate goal, the purpose of all the mitzvahs. That all the mitzvahs have a purpose to in some way transform Klal Yisrael into Mamleches Kohanim V'Goy Kadosh, the concept of Kedusha, which lies at the heart of the whole concept of the uniqueness of Klal Yisrael, comes out in this week's Parsha. And Kedoshim Tiyu is, the word Tiyu is very interesting, because Tiyu transforms doing into being. In other words, if most of the halachas appear to be a list of do's and don'ts, of you shall do this and you shall not do that, here suddenly the Torah is talking not about doing, but about Kadoshim Tiyu, to be a certain type of person, to be a certain type of nation. So Rashi already brings down, Sherov Gufei HaTorah Teluyin Boi, that most of the Gufei HaTorah, most of the essential features of Torah and Yahadus are all dependent on understanding properly Kadoshim Tiyu. But interestingly, Rashi only brings down half the Medrash. The other half of the Medrash, both in the Vayikra Rabbah and in the Tanchuma, is that Sha'aseres Hadibros Kalulim Bo, that in Parshas Kadoshim you find reference to the Aseres Hadibros. Now this is not immediately obvious, but nevertheless, if you look, this is brought down by the Chizkuni, by the Ibn Ezra, by the Ramban. They're all very interested in this parallelism between the Aseres Hadibros on the one hand and Kedoshim Tiyu on the other. And I'd like to suggest that actually what Parshas Kedoshim does is that it takes the mitzvahs of the Ten Commandments one by one and raises them to a new level, and by doing so transforms them from simply a list of 10 mitzvahs into a way of life, which is much more detailed and much more sophisticated than it seemed at first sight. But you can't learn, Chazal are telling us, you can't learn the 10 Commandments without putting next to it Parshas Kedoshim and seeing how each one of these commandments develops. So just for example, I want to give you a few examples. I won't go through all 10 of them, but a few examples. So whereas in the 10 Commandments we have Kabare Sovicha Vasimecha, right, the mitzvah of Kibud Av V'Eim, where Kibud, Chazal understand, the Gemara in Kiddushin, it refers to our duty to care for parents. When parents need help or parents need assistance, then the children have a primary obligation to care for them. Here it's raised not just to care, but Ish Imo V'Aviv Tira'u, that Yira means a certain amount of respect and deference, that which is an attitude of mind, an attitude of behavior, not just a physical care to make sure they can eat and drink and have housing, but that they are highly respected. And that is a new layer on Kibud Av V'Eim, and it's also extended later on in the Parsha into Mipnei Seva Tokum V'Hodarto Pnei Zoken, that it's not only parents, but it's also other people in authority, other people of respect, mainly the elderly and the scholars, those people who contain Torah wisdom. All those are included in some way in this same category. So Kibbut Av V'Eim is expanded dramatically in the Parsha of Parshas Kedoshim. Similarly, where it says in the says there is no sigzol, you shouldn't steal. So suddenly in Parshas Kedoshim we have much more sophisticated descriptions of stealing. Moznei tzedek, vehin tzedek. You need to be very careful with your weights and measures to make sure that you're actually delivering exactly what you say that you're delivering. Lo tasu ovel b'mishpat. You can't afford any slight discrepancies of any sort when you're dealing with judgment, when you're dealing with masa or maton, where you've agreed a certain quantity or a certain quality of goods. All that is a much greater refinement of lo sigzol. Similarly, lo sirtzach, that you shouldn't murder. So in the Aseres HaDibros, it simply talks about killing, but here suddenly it's lo sa'amod al dam re'echa, which means that even passively one can be responsible for somebody else's death, or even if it's not death, Chazal understand lo sa'amod al dam re'echa to mean passively stand by and watch someone else being damaged, even if that damage is financial damage or reputational damage. One has to intervene in order to protect people from damage and from any other dangers. And that's lo sa'amod al dam re'echa, the passivity of it is also a very dramatic further development of lo sirtzach. Similarly, lo selech rochel ba'amecha, the idea of slander and lashon hara being a type of murder. You are destroying a person's reputation. You're just destroying his role in society. You're destroying his ability to function among people and that is also a form of murder, similarly to embarrassing somebody publicly. Malbim pnei chaveru barabim. All these activities Chazal refer to as shefichus domim. Now, what Chazal are really saying is that when the Aseres HaDibros give us 10 commandments, these are only headline rules, but each one of them is spelt out in greater detail in Parshas Kedoshim and has a much broader effect. And it transforms, it's not just that it's got more details to it, but these 10 commandments suddenly take on a role of a way of life, an elevated way of life, a refined way of life, a moral and purposeful way of life based on the Aseres HaDibros. Similarly, we find, for example, in the Aseres HaDibros, we find Avodah Zarah, not to worship idols, and suddenly here in Kedoshim we find not only don't worship idols, but even al tifnu el elilim, don't even move in that direction. Don't even take them seriously. Don't even consider the other worships, other forms of worship. Don't even look at them in any respectful way. Al tifnu el elilim. And here's an interesting line, not to make for use of masecha literally means molten images, which they used to do in the ancient world. Molten meaning metal, made of metal, which is molded into certain forms. But I've often said that actually in our generation, in the 21st century, this Isur of Elohei Masecha Losasel takes on a whole new meaning, because the word Masecha, Mem Samach, Kaf Hey, also in modern Hebrew means a masach, which means a screen, the screen of the computer, the screen of the video, the screen of the mobile phone, that they shouldn't become Elohei Masecha, God's idols, a worshipful activity which we are drawn to, which we are addicted to, and which we can't tear ourselves away from, is a form of modern Avodah Zarah, and it can't be by chance that the Torah in Kedoshim speaks about Elohei Masecha in that context, that it's a form of Avodah Zarah, in the sense that it's a form of all-consuming lifestyle, and the impact on a person's mindset is total. And that is the form of a modern Elohei Masecha. So all these are ways in which the Aseres HaDibros come to life in Parshas Kedoshim, and that's why the Medrash says Aseres HaDibros kalulimbo. Every one of the Aseres HaDibros is spelt out in Parshas Kedoshim, and that makes this parsha so precious. But in addition to that, there is the whole idea of Kedoshim, Tiyu ki Kadosh ani Hashem Elokechem, the Kedusha of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that ultimate and total Kedusha, which is of course the Kedusha of Ein Sof, an infinite Kedusha, is something that we can have a little bit of. We can in some way participate in that Kedusha. And that's what the Seforno and the Ramban both say here, that actually what we're dealing here with is the mitzvah of v'holachta bidrachav. One of the Tariq mitzvahs is to try not only to do the mitzvahs which tell us the do's and don'ts, but to be a certain type of person. The being of v'holachta bidrachav means, firstly, to take on the qualities, the Gemara in in Sota Daf Yudalad, which speaks about Mahu Rachum, Afatah Rachum, to imitate the chesed of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, like HaKadosh Baruch Hu is engaged, says the Gemara, in Bikor Cholim and Kvuras HaMeis, etc. We need to do chesed as a form of halachta b'drach of imitating HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but also there is Mahu Kodosh of Ato Kodosh. As the Rambam writes in Hilchos Deis, chapter 1, he says the halachta b'drach includes also Kedusha. And the truth is, it's a mafurish pasuk. This Kadishtem v'yisem Kedoshim, ki Kadosh ani Hashem Elokeichem. This week's Parsha says this 3 times, in the beginning of the Parsha, in the middle of the Parsha, and in the closing psukim of the Parsha, that you shouldn't miss it. That actually what's being required of us is to lead a life of an elevated life, a life of hisroimamus, a life which is not stuck in egoism and self-gratification and materialism, but is dedicated towards Avodas Hashem, and all the Aseres HaDibros become not only rules, but they come, each one is a klal, from which there are hundreds and hundreds of protim of examples and details derived from it, and that is the great segula of this week's parsha, that we should indeed engage in a life of kedusha. And the Sforno ends up by saying, and that's what it means in Bereshis chapter 1 when it says that the man was created b'tselem Elokim. It means that a person was created with the potential to engage in that kedusha. The Kedusha of Parshas Kedoshim is an explanation of Bereshis chapter 1, Tselem Elokim, that we have the capacity to adopt and to practice that Kedusha in all the details of Aseres HaDibros, and in that way, Lihios Kedoshim, come close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in a life of Kedusha, v'chein yehi rotz.